Perth is Australia's fourth biggest city, with a population of 2.3 million. It's a city defined by its beautiful beaches, its laid-back lifestyle, and by the fact that most of us, over east, forget the city even exists. Perhaps surprisingly, Perth has an expansive suburban railway network. 8 lines, 85 stations, and 270 kilometers of track. It's a large system for a relatively small city. It's the third busiest rail system in Australia, with 59.7 million trips made on Perth's rail network last year by Perthians. Perthlings? Perthites? Alright, Sandgropers. There's no doubt that Perth has successfully adapted railways to a sprawling suburban context. Therein lies the problem, because Perth is now the longest city in the world. Before I continue, massive shout out to my monthly Patreon supporters. Please do consider supporting me over on Patreon if you can. Also, please subscribe if you haven't already, and do be sure to check out the rest of Building Beautifully, where I discover Sydney one story at a time. Perth has two types of railways. There's the heritage lines, that's the Armidale, Fremantle and Midland lines, all built in the late 1800s. These are named as such because they were largely built before the proliferation of the car. That means stops are located closer together. You couldn't drive to your local station back in the day, after all. As a result, stations are generally smaller and more bare bones. Patronage is correspondingly lower. Then there's the non-heritage lines. That's just everything else, all built since the 90s. Shout out to YouTube channel Cockatoo Transit for allowing me to use this footage. These lines are the bread and butter of Perth's railway system. Stations are widely spaced apart, with more facilities and a much larger footprint. Famously, parts of these lines run in the median of freeways, most notably the Kwinana and Mitchell freeways. Perth is the only city in Australia that does this, which makes their system feel so distinct from the rest of Australia. You may not have known this, but Amy was actually born in Perth. So, Amy, when you lived in Perth, what were your experiences with Perth's railways?
I don't know. I moved to Sydney when I was 4.
What? For this video, I interviewed Harriet, who I've had the pleasure of working with over the past year.
I'm Harriet and I'm a local Perthite. Yeah, have grown up here and work in the transport planning world. The fact that it's really simple and reliable with the strong foundation from the heritage lines and then the modern expansions, I think is a really unique combination.
In recent years, Perth has invested a lot in rail thanks to its Metronet program. In the past 3 years alone, Perth has seen its rail system extended by approximately 72 kilometres. That's really impressive, particularly when compared to similarly sized cities like Brisbane and Adelaide. They've opened the airport line, the Joondalup line extension to Yanchep, the Thornley line extension to Coburn Central, and the Ellenbrook line. Impressively, the entire Metronet program, which includes everything I just discussed, as well as the Byford extension, level crossing removals and new rolling stock, has only cost $12.4 billion. In comparison, the Sydney Metro Western Sydney Airport has cost $11 billion, despite being 3 times shorter. It genuinely appears that Perth has avoided the cost crisis that has plagued other Australian cities like Sydney and Melbourne. Sydney's lack of line reservations for new lines forces us to build in tunnels or buy land from landowners, which is extremely costly in a city with overvalued land. Perth saves on these costs by not only building lines on wide freeway medians that the state owns, but reserving corridors decades in advance, which was the case for the Ellenbrook line.
So our growth here in Perth has really focused on broad suburban corridors with lots of space available. And that means rail can be built above ground without kind of the same level of disruption that you would see in older, more denser cities.
Additionally, Perth's airport line, which I've ridden on, is probably Australia's best airport link.
I just had my ticket checked. That is the quickest I've ever had my ticket checked anywhere. This is the first time I have ever been on a train in Perth, and I got my ticket check.
It's frequent, it's beautiful, it gets you into Perth in just 20 minutes, and most importantly, at just $3.50 one way, is much cheaper than Australia's other two airport trains, in Sydney and Brisbane. With little exception, trains show up every 15 minutes in Perth at all stations, all day, and up to every 8 minutes in peak hour. They're the only Australian city to achieve 15-minute headways network-wide. Even Sydney has exceptions, so that's actually very respectable. But there's a big problem. Perth is the longest city in the world. It stretches for 150 kilometers from Two Rocks in the north to Dawesville in the south. On a very simple level, this is because, well, everyone wants to live near the beach. It's the most desirable place, and fair enough, it's beautiful.
The coast is mostly sandy limestone, making development relatively cheap and easy to build there. The Great Australian Dream is very much still alive here. People, I think, in Sydney and Melbourne and bigger cities often choose to live closer to the CBD or in high-rise apartments, but people in Perth tend to value the laid-back beachside culture.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realise the link between Perth's sprawl and Perth's new railways. Herein lies the problem. Perth's railways are sprawl enabling. Let's take the new Yanchep station, which opened in July 2024, as an example. It's located 55 kilometres from Perth Underground. It's reasonable to assume a town this far from Perth wouldn't be very big. Yes, it's right on the coast, but so are other places closer to Perth. The key difference here is that ever since the late 80s, before the original line to Joondalup opened, there's been plans to one day build a train station at Yanchep. People largely moved to Yanchep because of the railway plans. No wonder Yanchep's population went from just 2,000 in 2001 to 11,000 in 2021. Although there's no freeway to Yanchep yet, freeways definitely have this effect too. For what it's worth, Harriet had a different perspective. Perhaps this sprawl would have happened regardless of the railways.
I do think that the railways are making sprawl more livable. Historically, growth happened on the corridors, and then transport infrastructure came quite a long time after that, where I think we're starting to see a change with even some of the Metronet projects where the transport infrastructure comes first.
New railways often promise to get you home faster, but that's not the whole story. Say hello to Marchetti's constant. This is the idea that throughout history, from dense ancient cities like Rome to sprawling modern cities, humanity has had an accepted tolerance limit for commuting. 1 hour each day, or half an hour one way. So when new transport projects are constructed, often instead of shortening a city's average commute time, many people simply move further away, increasing the distance they're travelling and just cancelling out any gains. This doesn't render the impact of new transport moot, because they allow new residents to move further out into a larger, cheaper house. Without them, your only option would be to live closer to the city in more expensive houses or small apartments. We need housing diversity, I'm not denying that. Master planned communities on the peripheries of our cities always make a big deal of transport accessibility. Oh, and also, you can literally buy houses in Yanchep near the beach for just $500,000. Cheaper than places in Sydney 50 kilometers from the coast. And indeed, 2/3 of Perth's new housing is being built on the peripheries. Okay, so this all sounds great. Let's all jump on a plane and head on over to Perth. Actually, that's a bit expensive. We'll head on over in a bit, but before we do, is there perhaps a problem with all this? Well, the only way to allow residents on Perth's fringes to get to the CBD in a reasonable amount of time was to put stations really far apart. As a result, average stop spacings on the Yanchep line are 3.6 kilometers, with the final gap between Eglinton and Yanchep being 7.8 kilometers. When you put stations this far apart, commuter catchments balloon. Low-density suburbia spreads people out beyond the standard 800-meter walking catchment of a suburb, making last-mile connectivity a nightmare. That forces most of the suburb to either catch feeder buses or drive. As a result, stations have huge car parks. Yanchep has an eye-watering 923 parking spots. Sometimes, even if you do live close to the station, it's still impossible to walk there. If you live in this house in Rockingham, to the south of Perth, you're just 20 meters from Rockingham Station, but a 1.3, 18-minute walk away. Too often, suburbia is designed with nothing but the car in mind. Public transport is meant to provide an alternative to the car, but Perth's railways kind of demand car ownership, forcing residents to put up with all its accompanying problems.
We are just really car dependent, and I think because our public transport network, it's really great, but it is quite CBD and commuter focused. When I moved back, first thing I did, I had to buy a car after living in Sydney for 4 years without one, so it's quite sad. We love to drive so much that our commuter car parks are often overflowing onto residential streets, and those local residents aren't very happy about that.
By enabling sprawl, Perth's railways enable all the ill that comes with it. Suburbs aren't walkable or vibrant. Huge swathes of land are cleared, harming the biodiversity of Perth's fringes. Oh, and this affects every Sandgroper. It costs $90,000 more to build a dwelling on Perth's fringes than in existing areas. Instead of capitalising on existing schools, healthcare and roads closer to the city, infrastructure is permanently playing catch up. So what does Sydney do differently? Okay, well, I'll be honest, we definitely don't do everything better. But let's go over the positives first. Not one of the new stations on the Sydney Metro west of Epping has commuter parking. Instead, there's density. Not only is this encouraged, but at this point it's a given in Sydney. Any new station will be surrounded by apartments. This encourages sustainable connections to the metro, whether that be by cycling or walking. Take the Christopher Casanisi Bridge, quickly linking North Ryde residents to their metro station. Communities are self-contained and self-sufficient. There are supermarkets, restaurants and vibrancy. Sydney is focusing a lot more on infill development, with roughly 50% of new homes built in Sydney in the past 15 years being located within 1 kilometre of a train station. Compare that to Perth, where they were aiming for 47% of new housing to be infill, but only got to 29% in 2021. But in many ways, we're not any better than Perth. Our recent railways have also been sprawl enabling. Huge amounts of detached housing have been built on the ends of the Sydney Metro Northwest, in places like Tallawong and North Kellyville. Most of the Northwest Metro stations have massive car parks. Tallawong, the last station on the line, has 1,000, more than Yanchep. Worse, because the area around Tallawong is much more populated, the problems are greatly compounded. Tallawong Station's car park fills up by 7 AM. Quite catastrophic. Marchetti's constant enables all this, and the government exploits this, increasing distance, maintaining time, pushing people out into infrastructure deserts. The alternative is surely superior. Reduce both distance and time. That is precisely what infill development would achieve. Instead of focusing on the peripheries, Metronet could focus on expanding rail access to existing areas. Alternatively, Perth could leverage its heritage railways. Stations are spaced more closely, their footprints are much smaller, and the lack of huge car parks makes their surrounds much more walkable. They're ripe for densification.
Densify the existing urban footprint and looking at where apartments and infill is probably best. The state government have started investing in some really strategic areas such as Subiaco, Midland and Armidale, where they can kind of streamline approvals and push for higher density. But at the moment, it is really kind of state government led. Cost pressures, developer profits too low to justify delivery of high density dwellings.
The delivery of apartments in Sydney will be a lot more profitable for a developer, because you could sell an apartment in Sydney for 700, 800, 900 grand. You wouldn't get away with that in Perth.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the price, the gap is starting to get smaller, but I think there's still quite a way to go.
When you can buy a house on Perth's outskirts for cheaper than Sydney's median apartment, you can't be surprised when most residents do that. People literally move to Perth for that. Heck, even I'm tempted to move there because of how cheap it is. I don't even swim. I'm certainly not suggesting we stop building houses. There'll always be a market for that. But give people options. build the houses, but build them closer to the city. Yanchep does not need to be that far away. There's empty land closer to Perth. More importantly, build infill housing and build more of that. It's much better value for the taxpayer, and it gives citizens a more livable alternative. While Metronet stations are generally surrounded by car parks, some stations buck the trend. The new Ellenbrook station actually has some modest medium density to its south. Alkimos station remains completely undeveloped because apartments and retail developments will be built next to it to turn it into a major city centre for Perth's north. And from what I can tell, the plan is for many of these commuter car parks to eventually one day give way to new density. This is more similar to Sydney. Tallawong is surrounded by parking, yes, but also a huge number of apartments. Building low-density houses around fringe stations like Tallawong and Yanchep isn't ideal, but it can at least be done better. Instead of expecting most people to drive, better feeder buses that are easy to get to and run reliably every 5 minutes in peak hour and 10 minutes off peak are essential. Separated cycleways can shift more people onto space-efficient bikes, and reducing the speed limits on roads will make cycling safer. Finally, and uniquely in Tallawong's case, extending the metro to Schofields will spread out the metro's catchment.
One thing that Perth could do better, I guess, things like bus rapid transit or light rail. So Sydney's doing a really good job of investing in that missing middle, which allows like higher capacity services at a much lower cost compared to like heavy rail infrastructure. Yes, it is a lot more cheaper to develop urban sprawl growth. I think that there's got to be like a stop to our urban sprawl at some point. You know, the city can't keep growing in length. So hopefully that will happen.